When Ethan Turner inherited his father's old sheep herd, everyone in the valley told him to replace it with modern stock. They laughed at his decision, until a mysterious disease swept through the county, wiping out thousands of sheep while Ethan's flock stayed perfectly healthy. What secret had his father been protecting all those years? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories of resilience, faith, and rural justice. Cold autumn rain drifted across the rolling hills of Cedar Creek, Montana, while low clouds hung over the valley on the morning of Richard Turner's funeral. Ethan Turner stood beside the freshly covered grave long after most of the mourners had left. At 29, Ethan was tall and lean with broad shoulders earned from years of ranch work during summer breaks. His dark brown hair was slightly overgrown, and a short beard softened the sharp lines of his jaw. Calm and thoughtful by nature, he had spent the last 7 years working as a financial manager in Seattle. Yet despite his professional success, guilt had followed him ever since his father's health began failing. He often wondered whether he should have returned home sooner. Now the entire responsibility of the Turner Ranch rested on his shoulders. The ranch covered 120 acres of rugged Montana pastureland and housed the Turner Woolies, a heritage sheep breed that had been raised by his family for generations. Unlike modern commercial sheep, they were smaller, leaner, and slower to mature. Their thick cream-colored wool, strong legs, and remarkable hardiness made them perfectly suited for the harsh hills surrounding Cedar Creek. But most local ranchers considered them outdated and unprofitable. The loudest critic was Brandon Cole. Standing near the church entrance after the funeral, Brandon approached Ethan with a confident smile. At 52, Brandon was a large, heavy-set man with silver, streaked black hair, expensive ranch clothing, and cold gray eyes that rarely revealed genuine warmth. Years of business success had turned him into one of the wealthiest livestock owners in Montana, but many locals quietly described him as ruthless. "Your father was a good man," Brandon said smoothly. "But those sheep are a relic. Sell me the ranch and the herd before they drag you under." Ethan politely refused. That evening, alone inside the old farmhouse, Ethan opened the leather, bound record books his father had kept for decades. Rain tapped softly against the windows, while memories filled the quiet rooms. As he reviewed page after page of expenses, something unusual caught his attention. Feed costs, fence repairs, fuel, property taxes. But one category remained nearly empty year after year: veterinary expenses. Ethan pulled older ledgers from the shelf and checked again. The number never changed. For more than 30 years, Richard Turner had spent almost nothing on veterinary care. Winter arrived early in Cedar Creek and showed no mercy. By mid-season, snow buried the hills beneath nearly 3 feet of ice, crusted drifts, and temperatures plunged far below anything locals had seen in years. The wind howled across the open valleys day and night, rattling barn walls and freezing water troughs solid. For Ethan Turner, the season became a daily battle. Before sunrise each morning, he pulled on heavy coveralls and trudged through deep snow to check the Turner Woolies. Exhaustion settled permanently behind his eyes. The pressure of running the ranch alone weighed heavily on him. Yet every time he considered selling, he remembered his father's hands turning the pages of those old ledgers. Richard Turner had believed in these sheep when nobody else did. What surprised Ethan most was how little help the flock seemed to need. While neighboring ranchers spent thousands on heated shelters and emergency feed deliveries, the Turner Woolies remained remarkably resilient. Their thick wool coats trapped warmth naturally, and their strong legs allowed them to move through snow-covered hills with ease. Ethan often watched in amazement as the sheep pawed through frozen drifts to uncover dormant grass hidden beneath. Not a single ewe appeared weak. Not a single lamb showed signs of illness. The same could not be said for Brandon Cole's operation. The sprawling commercial ranch that covered thousands of acres had become a scene of growing panic. Truckloads of supplemental feed arrived almost daily. Workers rushed between barns around the clock. Rumors spread through town that hundreds of sheep were developing severe respiratory infections. One afternoon, Ethan drove into Cedar Creek for fencing supplies and overheard worried conversations inside the feed store. Ranchers spoke quietly about coughing animals, sudden deaths, and mounting veterinary bills. That was where Ethan first met Dr. Michael Carter. At 47, Dr. Carter was one of the most recognized livestock veterinarians in western Montana. He was tall and narrow-faced, with neatly combed sandy blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that rarely displayed emotion. His spotless appearance and polished manner gave him an air of authority. Years earlier, he had built a reputation for helping large commercial ranches maximize production, and most of the valley trusted his judgment without question. Dr. Carter approached Ethan near the register. "I've been meaning to speak with you," he said calmly. Ethan nodded politely. The veterinarian folded his arms. "Your father never followed modern herd management practices? No vaccination programs? No pharmaceutical prevention schedules? That's a dangerous approach." Ethan remained calm. "My sheep seem healthy." "For now," Carter replied. "Disease doesn't care about tradition." The conversation lingered in Ethan's mind long after he returned home. Over the following weeks, conditions across the valley worsened. Brandon's losses continued to rise. Several neighboring ranches reported similar outbreaks. Veterinary trucks became a constant sight on snowy roads. Then the accusations began. At first, they appeared as rumors. Someone claimed Ethan's sheep carried a rare infection. Someone else suggested the Turner Woolies were spreading disease without showing symptoms. Soon the gossip reached town meetings and ranch supply stores. One evening, Ethan stopped at a local diner and noticed conversations falling silent when he entered. Fear was spreading faster than the illness itself. A few days later, Brandon Cole arrived at the ranch unexpectedly. Snow swirled around his expensive truck as he stepped out. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and the confident smile Ethan remembered from the funeral had vanished. "You need to isolate your herd," Brandon said. Ethan frowned. "Why?" "Because they're the source." The accusation hit harder than Ethan expected. "My sheep aren't sick." "Maybe they don't show it," Brandon snapped. "But animals are dying all over this valley." For a moment neither man spoke. The wind pushed snow across the pasture behind them, where dozens of Turner Woolies calmly grazed, despite the freezing weather. Brandon stared at the flock with growing frustration. Then he delivered the warning Ethan would remember for a long time. "Dr. Carter is preparing a report for the State Agricultural Board. If they decide your herd is a threat, they'll have the authority to quarantine this ranch." As Brandon drove away through the falling snow, Ethan stood alone beside the fence. For the first time since his father's funeral, he felt something deeper than grief. He felt fear. The warning Brandon Cole delivered refused to leave Ethan Turner's mind. During the following week, the pressure intensified from every direction. Letters arrived from the State Agricultural Board requesting records about herd management practices. Local ranchers who once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact. The rumors had done their work. Ethan spent long hours reviewing his father's files, searching for anything that could help defend the ranch. The more he studied Richard Turner's records, the more convinced he became that his father had understood something about the Turner Woolies that modern agriculture had forgotten. Yet none of that would matter if the state ordered a quarantine. One evening, after another day of heavy snowfall, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table while wind rattled the farmhouse windows. Across from him lay stacks of paperwork and inspection notices. For the first time, doubt crept into his thoughts. What if Brandon succeeded? What if everything his family had built disappeared? Within months, a sudden bark shattered the silence. Then another, and another. Ethan immediately recognized the sound. It came from Scout. Scout was a 12-year-old border collie that had belonged to Richard Turner for most of his life. Though age had silvered the fur around his muzzle and slowed his movements, the dog remained fiercely loyal and unusually intelligent. Years of protecting sheep in harsh Montana conditions had sharpened instincts that Ethan trusted completely. Scout never barked without reason. Ethan grabbed his heavy coat, flashlight, and rifle before stepping into the freezing darkness. The dog was already racing toward the eastern pasture. Snow crunched beneath Ethan's boots as he followed. The beam of his flashlight swept across the hillside until it landed on a figure moving near the flock's primary water tank. The man froze. For a brief moment neither moved. Then the stranger attempted to run. "Stop!" Ethan shouted. The man slipped on the icy ground and crashed into the snow. A metal bucket flew from his hands, spilling a pale liquid across the frozen earth. Ethan reached him within seconds. The stranger raised trembling hands. It was Kyle Mercer. At 32, Kyle was a veterinary technician employed by Dr. Michael Carter's clinic. He was a thin man with sandy hair, narrow shoulders, and nervous eyes that rarely held a steady gaze. Unlike Carter, Kyle had always been known around town as quiet and anxious. After losing his father in a mining accident years earlier, he had spent most of his adult life avoiding conflict and following orders rather than making decisions. Now, fear was written across his face. "What are you doing on my property?" Ethan demanded. Kyle remained silent. Ethan pointed toward the overturned bucket. "What is that?" The technician swallowed hard. His hand shook violently. "It's bacterial culture," he finally whispered. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of bacterial culture?" Kyle looked away. "I don't know all the details. Dr. Carter prepared it." The words hit Ethan like a punch. For several seconds neither spoke. Snow continued falling around them. Finally Kyle lowered his head. "He told me the state needed evidence. He said if your flock tested positive, they'd order a quarantine immediately." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. "You were trying to infect my sheep." Kyle nodded weakly. The confession came pouring out. According to Kyle, Dr. Carter had become increasingly obsessed with proving that the Turner Woolies were responsible for the valley's outbreak. Brandon Cole had been pressuring him constantly as losses mounted across the commercial ranches. Together they had developed a plan. If Ethan's sheep appeared infected, state officials could justify drastic action. The more Kyle spoke, the darker the truth became. This was never about protecting livestock. It was about removing Ethan. It was about gaining control of Turner Ranch. Ethan collected the bucket and photographed the contaminated snow around it. He recorded Kyle's confession using his phone and secured every piece of evidence he could find. When Kyle finally finished speaking, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. Ethan believed him, but belief would not change what had happened. As the wind howled across the frozen hills, Ethan looked toward the distant lights of Brandon Cole's ranch. For weeks he had thought he was fighting rumors. Now he understood the truth. Someone was willing to destroy an entire bloodline of sheep to take his family's land. Ethan Turner barely slept after Kyle Mercer's confession. Before dawn, he organized every piece of evidence on the kitchen table, photographs of the contaminated snow recordings of Kyle's statements, and samples collected from the spill site. Outside, the winter wind continued to sweep across the hills. But for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something stronger than fear. He felt determination. The first call he made was to Dr. Daniel Brooks, at 55. Daniel Brooks was one of the most respected veterinary epidemiologists in the state. He was a tall man with weathered features, short gray hair, and a neatly trimmed beard. Decades spent investigating livestock disease outbreaks had made him cautious, methodical, and difficult to influence. Early in his career, Daniel had exposed a major agricultural fraud case that cost several powerful corporations millions of dollars. Since then, he had earned a reputation for valuing evidence above politics. After reviewing the recordings and photographs, Daniel immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. "This is no longer a livestock issue," he told Ethan over the phone. "This is potential criminal sabotage." By sunrise, Daniel was already driving toward Cedar Creek. Unfortunately, Ethan was not the only person arriving at the ranch that morning. A convoy of vehicles appeared at the front gate shortly after 8 o'clock. Brandon Cole stepped out first. Despite wearing an expensive winter coat, he looked exhausted. Weeks of financial losses had deepened the lines around his eyes. The confident businessman who once dominated every room now appeared increasingly desperate. Dr. Michael Carter stood beside him. His usually flawless appearance remained intact, but tension showed in the tightness of his jaw. Accompanying them was Karen Whitmore. Karen, 51, served as a senior inspector for the State Agricultural Board. She was a professional woman with short silver blonde hair, sharp green eyes, and a reputation for strict enforcement of livestock regulations. Ranchers respected her because she rarely acted without evidence. Karen carried official quarantine paperwork. "Mr. Turner," she said, "we are here to conduct emergency inspections." Before Ethan could respond, another set of vehicles entered the property. Daniel Brooks had arrived. 2 state police cruisers followed closely behind him. The atmosphere changed instantly. Daniel walked directly toward Karen and quietly handed her copies of the evidence Ethan had collected. For nearly 30 minutes, nobody spoke while the documents were reviewed. Then Daniel opened a portable testing unit he had brought from the university laboratory. The bacterial samples recovered from the snow were examined immediately. Everyone watched. Brandon shifted nervously. Carter avoided eye contact. The results appeared on the screen. Artificially cultured bacteria. Laboratory grown, deliberately concentrated. Not naturally occurring. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snow. Covered mountains surrounding the ranch. Daniel then presented Kyle Mercer's recorded confession. The audio played clearly. Every word could be heard. Kyle described Dr. Carter's instructions. He described the contamination plan. He described Brandon's repeated pressure to eliminate Ethan's flock from the valley. Karen's expression hardened with every passing minute. When the recording ended, she slowly turned toward Carter. "Is any of this false?" she asked. For the first time since Ethan had known him, the veterinarian had no answer. State troopers immediately stepped forward. Dr. Carter was placed under arrest for biological sabotage, evidence tampering, and falsifying official agricultural reports. Brandon exploded in anger. He accused everyone of conspiring against him. He demanded lawyers. He threatened lawsuits. Nobody listened. As investigators continued reviewing records from Carter's clinic and Brandon's ranch operation, the situation became even worse. Financial audits uncovered illegal transactions. Veterinary records revealed unauthorized pharmaceutical use. Several banned livestock growth substances were discovered within Brandon's commercial operation. The investigation rapidly expanded beyond the original case. Within days, state agencies launched a full examination of Brandon's business empire. For Ethan, the most important moment came quietly. Karen Whitmore approached him before leaving. "The quarantine request is being withdrawn," she said. Ethan looked toward his grazing flock. For months, he had been defending his father's legacy against accusations and lies. Now the truth had finally been exposed. As police vehicles escorted Dr. Carter away, and investigators began searching Brandon's facilities, Ethan stood beside Scout near the fence line. The Turner Woolies continued, grazing peacefully beneath the gray winter sky for the first time since his father's funeral. The ranch no longer felt under siege. The battle was not completely over, but the people responsible for trying to destroy his family had finally been exposed. Spring arrived slowly in Cedar Creek. Snow retreated from the hillsides, revealing green pastures that seemed brighter than Ethan Turner remembered. The long winter was finally over, and for the first time in many months, the Turner Ranch felt peaceful. The investigation into Brandon Cole's operation had continued throughout the winter. What began as a case involving biological sabotage soon exposed a much larger network of misconduct. State auditors uncovered falsified production reports, illegal livestock treatments, and extensive financial fraud. Investors withdrew their support almost immediately. Within a few months, the commercial empire Brandon had spent decades building collapsed under its own weight. For Ethan, however, life was moving in a very different direction. One morning, several white university vehicles arrived at the ranch. Scientists from Montana State University had spent months studying blood samples, breeding records, and health histories collected from the Turner Woolies. Leading the project was Dr. Rachel Morgan. Rachel was 43 years old, athletic and confident, with shoulder-length auburn hair and intelligent hazel eyes that rarely missed small details. Years earlier, she had lost a significant research grant after refusing to alter scientific data for a corporate sponsor. The experience had strengthened her commitment to honest research and earned her enormous respect within academic circles. As she walked through the pasture alongside Ethan, she watched several newborn lambs racing through the grass. "They're remarkable," she said. Ethan smiled slightly. "My father always believed that." Rachel nodded. The science finally proves he was right. The university's findings shocked the agricultural community. The Turner woolies possessed unusually strong natural resistance to several respiratory diseases that commonly affected modern sheep populations. Decades of selective commercial breeding had increased productivity in many modern breeds, but had gradually weakened some of their natural defenses. The Turner bloodline had preserved those traits. More importantly, the resistance appeared genetically stable. The discovery attracted immediate attention from livestock researchers across the country. Several weeks later, Ethan traveled to Bozeman to attend a meeting with university officials. There he met Thomas Bennett. Thomas, 61, served as Director of Agricultural Research Funding. He was a tall man with silver hair, deep-set brown eyes, and a calm, thoughtful personality. Growing up on a small cattle ranch during difficult economic years had given him enormous respect for family farmers. Thomas presented the university's proposal, a long-term research partnership, genetic preservation funding, educational outreach programs, and a grant worth several $1 million. The agreement would allow the university to study the Turner woolies while ensuring the bloodline remained protected for future generations. Ethan accepted. As the months passed, positive changes spread throughout the ranch. New fencing replaced aging barriers. Pastures expanded. Equipment that had been deteriorating for years was finally repaired. Then came unexpected news. The bankruptcy court overseeing Brandon Cole's assets announced a public sale of large portions of his former ranch property. The opportunity surprised everyone. Using part of the research funding and a carefully structured loan package, Ethan purchased several hundred adjoining acres that had once belonged to Brandon. The land that Brandon had spent years trying to take now became part of Turner Ranch. One warm afternoon near the end of spring, Ethan sat on the porch where his father had often spent quiet evenings. Scout rested nearby in the sunlight, older and slower now, but still faithfully watching the flock. Across the rolling hills, healthy lambs chased one another through fields of fresh grass. The sight brought back memories of Richard Turner. For months, Ethan had focused on surviving. Now, he finally understood what his father had spent a lifetime protecting. It had never been about stubbornness. It had never been about refusing change. It had been about preserving something valuable before the rest of the world realized its worth. Ethan opened one of the old leather-bound ledgers and slowly turned the pages. Feed, fencing, fuel taxes. The same familiar entries his father had recorded for decades. Then he reached the final line, veterinary expenses. With a quiet smile, Ethan picked up a pen. In the empty space beside the latest year, he carefully wrote a single number, 0. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are not the ones that grow the fastest, shine the brightest, or promise the quickest reward. Sometimes their worth is only revealed through patience, hardship, and the courage to protect them when no one else understands. Ethan's story is not only about sheep, land, or a family ranch. It is a reminder that many of us carry something inherited from those who came before us. Values, traditions, lessons, or quiet acts of wisdom that may seem outdated in a world constantly chasing what is new. Yet those gifts often become our greatest strength when life puts us to the test. Perhaps there is something in your own life that others overlooked, but later proved precious. If so, we'd love to hear your story. Please share it in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, please like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of faith, resilience, kindness, and hope. And wherever you may be today, may God bless you, watch over your family, bring peace to your home, strength to your heart, and light to your path in the days ahead.